Two massive stories are competing for attention right now. On their face, they may have nothing to do with one another, but peel back a few layers and they reveal the same issue. The American people don't know where to get honest information anymore. First, the Graham Platner story. He has dropped out of the main Senate race, finally answering for the assault allegations that were reported by Politico last week. But the New York Times had a chance to report on this months ago. They were spoon-fed the evidence, yet they chose not to investigate. Second major story is the Tyler Robinson pretrial, where Candace Owens continues to suggest that Robinson had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk's murder. Why is she doing this? Because selling doubt has made her famous. About 10 years ago, people began distrusting mainstream news. With the rise of independent podcasts, mainstream organizations like the New York Times, Fox News, and CNN fell out of favor with the public. People began to turn to independent sources simply because these independent names did not have a major network behind them pulling strings. But this week has revealed that you can't trust anyone. You can't trust mainstream news like the New York Times, and you can't trust the independent podcaster who is only interested in chasing clicks for money. So who can you trust? I'll get to that answer in a minute, and if you know the background, you can skip ahead. But if you don't, here is what happened. First, the New York Times. On Monday, Politico published a story about an ex-girlfriend of Graham Platner's alleging that Platner broke into her house one night and forced himself onto her. This ex-girlfriend's name is Jenny Rasko. Now, you may hear this and think that this was brand new information, but the New York Times published a soft version of that same story months ago in a piece titled "Several Women Who Dated Graham Platner Recall Unsettling Behavior." I don't have a Times subscription, so I'm relying on outside reporting here. But in that piece, they mentioned 3 ex-girlfriends of Platner's who said that he was abusive, but also 3 who said that he was a normal guy. In that piece, 30 paragraphs down, they mentioned Jenny Rasko's story, that Platner allegedly broke into her home and, as they said, engaged in reckless behavior. To be fair to them, that was all that Rasko told the New York Times. Rasko then went to Politico and gave the full story months later. So why is the New York Times in hot water today? Because of the reasons Rasko had to go to Politico. In the Times' initial story, the main allegation they focused on came from a woman named Lindsay Fifield. The Times said that Fifield found Platner abusive, but could not corroborate any of her allegations. They then spent 250 words talking about how Fifield is a Republican. That obviously gave the Democrats enough leeway to claim that Fifield is lying, and they dismissed the story as nothing more than a politically motivated hit job by Fifield. That didn't sit well with Rasko, so she went to Politico to publish her full story and included the fact that she is a Democrat and actually supports Platner's policies. There can be no allegation of her playing politics here. After the Political story was released, Lindsay Fifield came out with a tweet detailing how the New York Times intentionally chose not to investigate her claims. The Times said that they couldn't corroborate Fifield's allegations, but they didn't even try. Fifield gave them 5 of her friends to call to corroborate the claims, but they only called the 2 who she specifically said would not know the details of the abuse. They didn't call the other 3 friends. They also didn't reach out to her roommates who knew of Platner stalking their home. They didn't reach out to Fifield's fiance or priest, who she later confided in about the abuse. They had her dated diary entries, her email to her landlord asking if she could end her lease early because Platner was stalking her at the house. None of that made it into the story. Instead, the New York Times allowed the narrative to be about a Republican possibly making up these allegations to make him look worse to the voters. The Times intentionally made it an easy story to ignore, claimed they couldn't corroborate anything, then moved on with the rest of the main voters and the Democrat Party. But the truth is that they deliberately chose not to investigate her claims. The Times chose to allow Fifield's politics to become the story, not the behavior of their favorite candidate. Why did they do that? It's not complicated. They want Susan Collins to lose the election in Maine. They want Democrats to take control of the Senate, and they thought that Graham Platner was their best chance at picking up a seat in Maine. They wanted to protect what they saw as the Democrats' greatest asset. It's called catch and kill. The reporters write a story, but bury the most important parts to protect their preferred candidate. So instead of an honest report, they run a story that makes the accusers look like liars and Platner look like a victim. And what did that strategy do for the New York Times? All it did was it bought Platner a couple extra months, so the accusers then went to another outlet. Platner eventually had to drop out of the race anyways, and now the Democrats have to scramble to find a replacement. This is exactly why people have left mainstream media outlets. They don't trust places like the New York Times, who claim to be independent, It very clearly operated out of bias. So the people walked away into the arms of independent podcasters. Podcasters like Candace Owens, who claims that Charlie Kirk was not actually killed by Tyler Robinson, but by the CIA or Israel or even Erica Kirk. According to her, it couldn't be the guy who confessed to his parents who then turned him in. It couldn't be the guy whose DNA is on the weapon. It couldn't be the guy who was caught on camera at the university walking funny because the weapon was hidden in his pants. Nope, it must be Erica Kirk. Or now the pretrial is going on and evidence is coming out against her story, it could even somehow be Ben Shapiro, apparently. Her strategy is insinuation. Connect random dots and call it a pattern. Oftentimes that involves connecting random dots to accuse a very specific group of people of nefarious actions, but even when she's not drawing the Star of David into everything, her connections do not follow. But she comes up with the most sensational story, delivers it with a sense of smug arrogance, and then rakes in the cash as people want to believe the most insane stories possible. But it is never true. The sensational is never true. But her and some other independent media members traffic in the sensational to get clicks. So you can't trust the mainstream or the independent. This week, especially, has proven that. So who can you trust? And the answer is honestly quite simple. You trust the individual, not the label they wear. Stop distrusting someone simply because they work for a big network. Stop trusting someone simply because he has no logo behind him. Whether it's CNN, Fox, MS Now, or some dude with a microphone, the platform tells you nothing about the person. You can't judge the platform, judge the person. Listen to them and honestly ask yourself a few simple questions. Does the person lead with facts that you can verify? Are they telling you what happened before telling you how to feel? Or are they presenting facts that only they know about? If they do the latter, they're asking you to trust them without doing anything to earn that trust. Another big question to ask is whether the person is honest about their biases. This one implicates the New York Times. Because you want the person who says, I'm a Democrat, here's what I think. You want the person who says, I'm a Republican, here's my take on the news. What you absolutely do not want is the person or the network that claims to be independent. You do not want the network that claims to have no biases, because we know that everyone, no matter what they say, has some sort of bias, especially when it comes to the biggest news stories. You don't want the non-affiliated network because you don't know what the secret bias is that they are hiding. The New York Times claims to be independent, yet refuses to investigate plausible stories that may paint a Democrat in a negative light. But someone like Ben Shapiro tells you exactly what he is. He says he is a Republican, so you know that his thoughts, his opinions, and the stories he chooses to cover will be filtered through that bias. I am the same. I'm openly conservative. I'm a Republican. What I say, what I choose to write about is filtered through that lens. You know what you will get out of me. You can't say the same about the Times. There is one more test, and this one will get the Candace Owenses of the world. Ask yourself, are they telling you the most sensational possible story? You should always, always be suspicious of the most insane theories you hear. It is almost never the truth. Conspiracies on the scale that Candace is selling, the CIA, Israel, and Erica Kirk all being behind an assassination, would require hundreds, maybe thousands of people to keep their mouths shut forever. Thousands of people to remain quiet when speaking out would mean book deals, fame, and fortune. Thousands of people turning down the chance to break one of the biggest stories in human history. If you believe that that many people would pass up that much money and fame, then let me be honest with you. You have too much faith in human beings. And that brings us back to where we started. Who do you trust? Don't trust or distrust the platform. Trust and distrust the person. And you get there by doing the work yourself until that person earns your trust. Whether it's Sean Hannity at Fox, Jake Tapper on CNN, or myself here on YouTube, let the person earn your trust. And they earn it by consistently giving you fact-based analysis. They earn it by consistently giving you opinions that rely on facts that you can independently verify. If someone's prediction turns out to be wrong, that's fine, as long as the prediction wasn't based on an insane conspiracy theory. If an organization gets a story wrong after an honest investigation, that's fine too. But when people spout conspiracies, when networks refuse to investigate and then peddle a soft version of the story they could have had, it's time for you to turn away and find someone new. It's the only way we take the conversation back from the people who only want your money, your clicks, and who will do anything to ensure that their side wins. Subscribe and like the video for more from me. I'm trying to build a channel based on honest, reasonable takes and not the performative outrage you get from so many online these days. If that resonates with you, subscribe and head to my Substack to get new releases emailed directly to you. With that, I'll see you next time. Thank you.